So I'm here with you together with my mother Leah, talking about our case, conveying our messages, and trying to effect as much as we can for the safe return of 2 Israeli live civilians who are held in Gaza and 2 other fallen soldiers. One of them, my twin brother Hadar, was killed and kidnapped in the war in Gaza. I would like to start with a brief video that will help you understand our story, and after that I'll carry on with the talk. The title you gave is Moral Conflicts that the IDF deals with. And so let's start with the video.
On our broadcast tonight, On the Brink, Israelis running for cover as bomb shelters open.
Imagine what it would be like if all the cities of the United States, from the East Coast to Colorado, 80% of your population would be in bomb shelters.
It's called Lower Gaza, the network of tunnels built by Hamas that snake their way from Gaza into Israel.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Thursday night directed the IDF to send ground troops into Gaza to strike the terror tunnels into Israel.
Israel and the Palestinian factions have agreed that they are now prepared to implement a 72-hour unconditional humanitarian ceasefire.
The moment I heard that my brother is the missing soldier, I right away wanted to go back and help.
When we entered the tunnel, it was very dark. We barely saw anything except for a trail of blood, so I knew exactly where I need to go. I told Lieutenant Shaked, wait here for 5 minutes. If I don't come back, I'm probably dead. I heard Shaked yelling to me, we have to get out of the tunnel, we have to get out.
אני דורשת ממדינת ישראל שלא תעזוב את עזה עד שהיא תחזיר את הילד שלי הביתה.
הצבא אמור להיפגש איתנו במהלך הלילה.
אני מחכה לך, אני מחכה לרקוד איתך בחתונה שלה.
משפחה בצער רב מודיעה שהיא מקבלת את החלטת הצבא.
אומרים לנו, אתם לא משפחה שכולה נורמלית. כי אנחנו משפחה חטופה, אנחנו משפחה שבויה. הדר בעצם נחטף, ובדיעבד הגדירו אותו חלל. אני לא יכולה לסבול אף רגע שהוא בידי החמאס.
Hamas individuals use the cover of a humanitarian ceasefire to attack Israeli soldiers and even to take one hostage. That would be a rather barbaric violation of the ceasefire agreement. We would encourage the international community to respond to this and condemn it in the strongest possible terms.
We have, and I have, unequivocally condemned Hamas and the Palestinian factions that were responsible for killing 2 Israeli soldiers and abducting a 3rd. The UN has condemned them as well. If they are serious about trying to resolve this situation, that soldier needs to be unconditionally released as soon as possible.
A year and a half after this brave and patriotic young man's murder, the family still languishes in limbo, unable to give Hadar a proper burial because Hamas is holding his body hostage. But this was a ceasefire entered into by Israel at the urging of Secretary Kerry and the UN, and they should bear some responsibility for securing Hadar's return home to Israel. We must demand Hadar's return home and support the Goldin family in its efforts to give Hadar a proper burial and put an end to this nightmare.
Okay, so this was a brief video about us. The title of this evening is how to handle moral conflicts in battle. This evening I'll try to give you a little bit about my experience as a soldier in Operation Protective Edge in Gaza and in other operations that I participated as a soldier and as an officer. But I will also give you other examples that we are handling as a family in the last 4 years in our journey to bring Hadar and the rest of the captives in Gaza back home, and how really we are standing to resolve the situation of the MIA, the missing soldiers, IDF soldiers missing in action in Israel, raising the awareness towards that case, and of course a closure to our nightmare. But let me start this lecture by first stating or telling you that moral conflicts are not only in the soldiers' playground. I think the vast or the biggest part of it is actually here in this room, around the world, in the media, all around the globe. Dealing with terrorists, because terrorists use one strategy. It's very simple. Well, their target, we can talk about targets and what differentiates terrorists from other armed forces, but one thing is not disputable. They use one strategy. The one strategy is taking our morals as a Western society, as let's say now we're dealing with Jewish society with Jewish values, or Western society with democratic liberal values. And their strategy is to use those values against us, and while doing so trying to break our values and what hold us together. And that's it. After you break the spirit, you break what holds society together by using intimidation, by using various of tools. That's what they do. And so if this is the part, then the way to deal with it is not only in battlefield, but most of it is outside. And I hope I can convince you that my claim is correct, and you'll be the ones to judge and tell me by the end of this talk. I represent the Goldin family, my family, who's actually combating the kidnapping terrorism. And we do so for 4 years, 4 tiring years. We have been dealing with the kidnapping terrorism, which is taking the family, is actually targeted against the families, and I'll talk about it later. First of all, I'll tell you a story, a simple story, about a person that I know. His name is Israel Sarusi. Okay, so I'll tell you how he's connected to me. You'll understand later on. Israel Sarusi, he's now over 60 years old, and he used to live in a place which is now called Gaza, called Ganei Tal. Okay, so in Ganei Tal, 30 years ago, after the 6-Day War and after Yom Kippur, the Israeli government chose to put a lot of settlers in Gaza. And it became a big society that in a big percentage of population that in 2005 were evacuated from there as part of the disengagement program. So Israel, 30 years ago, came into Ganei Tal and he built paradise. His occupation was raising flowers, Okay, he made flowers. He had a flower nursery, and they grew up plants of flowers that became, I think the 40% of Israel's export of flowers that Gush Katif, that region within Gaza, had produced. And every day he came to the nursery and he watered, he had pipelines, he had everything, all the care and love he can give to flowers. Then it went off on the plane and to export and benefit Israel. Now it was 2005, it was 13 or 14 years ago. Israel got an inform from the government that they should be evacuated from Gaza. And actually, you remember, all of you remember that period and how hard and intense it was. But this settlement called Ganetal, they decided to go freely and establish their lives again in another place. So Israel had to leave his nursery behind. He didn't take the pipelines away. The nursery was prepared, and sadly he had to abandon it. And when I talked to him, he said, when I left Gaza, I left the pipelines, I left the whole nursery, I left everything was prepared for anyone to come and arrive and raise flowers. But instead, what they've done, they took this nursery and they made missile launchers and they dug tunnels. And that's what they did with our humanitarian faith and care and aim. And this Israel you haven't seen him in the video, but he's also the father of Hadar's, my twin brother's fiance, Edna. And he also told me not only that they took my flowers and they made missiles and and dug tunnels, they also killed and kidnapped my future groom, how do you say? Khatan, Mechutan. So this is an example that I experienced. And now let's analyze what's inside. It's taking, most basically, a humanitarian aim or gesture, whatever you call it. It was a one-sided agreement, a disengagement, and transform it into terrorist action. And in the middle, if it succeeds, also raise a political issue, an argument within society, a political argument, and try to break society from inside. So this is one form of terrorism that can be made, that can be used. I'm not talking about the political, leave the politics outside. The second one is my experience as a military soldier. I was an officer in the paratrooper special forces, took part in various operations. The one I want to talk about is Operation Protective Edge. As you've seen in the video, there were thousands of rockets being fired at Israel into concentrated population, aimed at kindergartens, aimed at hospitals, schools, wherever population can be and can be present. And terror tunnels has been dug. When I went into Gaza, I was a part of an infantry company, and one of my tasks was also to be a rescue company. Remember that detail because I'll come back to it later. All my targets, all my initiatives were situated in humanitarian places or places of concentrated population. There were mosques, there were kindergartens, there were medical centers, there were playgrounds, basketball grounds. And why is that? Is it because the IDF has any aim to do that? No. It was because the missile launchers, the ammunition storages, the terrorist headquarters, the entrances to the tunnel were all situated exactly under places. Just one example. Just before we talked a lot about UNRWA and all the institutes. In my original unit, there was a very big explosion of a medical center that belonged to UNRWA, where 3 of my personal friends that I grew up with training were killed in a patrol search within a medical center with explosives that were hidden within the walls and under the ground. So in this operation, I went to all of those places, trying to deal with the fact that these are actually targets, black targets, targets that shouldn't be touched. Second thing was that in a lot of times, most of the places that we were at involved civilians. And they were not terrorists, and they did not support terror. They were forced to be there, to be used as human shields. I'm sure you've seen a lot on it on the media. Actually, I'm sure you didn't see any of it in the media. I hope that you've seen in some places. So when I went inside Gaza, I was in charge of a rescue company. And when you're in a rescue company, it's very special in a way. I don't know if you thought about it in a way or you've seen it in the movie, but you actually, in opposed to every other soldiers, you actually, when there's crossfight, when there's battle, you go straight to the danger line. Go straight to where all the fire is, right? Because if you need to rescue people that are in danger, you should be the first one there to help them for refuge, so you're there. And in all those kind of places, I had the privilege to see in my own eyes that I'm entering hospitals and I'm entering mosques. Just one brief example, I was in a place called Khirbet Akhzea, suburbs of Rafah, the northern suburb of Rafah, the southern place of Gaza. So it was there where actually our engineering forces went to the main entrance of a tunnel which was situated within a mosque, and they worked for 2 days for a way to place the explosives in a way that the tower of the mosque won't collapse, just only the entrance and the way. And it was one of the most high-profile incidents where I can't remember if 2 or 3 were killed, 2 or 3 of these engineers, while doing that when they ran into an ambush. And the last example I want to give you from this operation was, I told you I was a rescue company, for all those who were listening and remembering. So my task was to save injured, and sadly a lot of soldiers who were actually killed, a lot of them were my friends, personal friends. And one of my jobs was actually to rescue Palestinian civilians from Gaza who were caught in the middle of fighting, and they were caught in the crossfire. And so my unit, my company, was actually responsible for the lives, I think now, of between 30 to 40 people, 30 to 40 civilians, and this was just us. Okay, and this was after all the other protocols that the IDF uses, that I will explain afterwards. But I think this is a good example, and it's fair to say that while I was rescuing innocent civilians who were caught in the middle of the fight and were used as human shields, and they thanked us lawfully after that, giving them medicine and refuge and everything. While I was doing that, Hamas was planning to initiate the most barbaric way of kidnapping my brother. So I think it's a good example, if I may say, that really puts in contrast the two things. But they all use one thing: taking our values and finding a way to exploit them against us. Using, to my opinion, one of the most barbaric ones are using humans as human shields. I remember encounters with those citizens telling us, thanking us for doing that. They weren't scared or intimidated when they met us. They were grateful because they knew they get medical care, and we knew that we are also endangering ourselves. For me as an officer, think about what you think. For all of those young men that you are in charge of their lives. And that brings me to the final part, and this is after 3 weeks of intense fighting in Operation Protective Edge in the war in Gaza. We reached the 1st of August 2014. It was meant to be the last day of this operation and conflict. As we drew near to, as we went inside, and the ceasefire that you watched. You all remember the video? Okay. So this ceasefire was brokered by the U.S., initiated by the U.S. And the UN, with support of all other EU, all other organizations that are involved presently in other ceasefires, including the ceasefire in Israel, specifically the ceasefire in Gaza. And we were inside Gaza, as I said, for 3 weeks. And in that morning, we received the message that we are entering a ceasefire. Hadar, my brother, was an officer in a combat unit called Sayeret Givati. It's the elite desert forces. And so during that ceasefire, the IDF is under very strict protocol not to open fire. Actually, it's very close to be barehanded. You go without allowing to use any firearms. And so while my brother Hadar and 2 other excellent soldiers went to a patrol mission, they ran into a cowardly ambush. It was just 1 hour, maybe a bit more after the ceasefire came into place. 14 terrorists were there, ambushed them, killing 3 of them, and abducting in a well-planned operation, abducting my brother shooting him and abducting him into a terror tunnel. At that point, I was not far away, just a bit more than 400 meters in the same sector, in the same region, in a patrol mission on my own. And it was there when I heard a distress call in the radio, and it said 2 soldiers have been killed. A 3rd soldier is apparently kidnapped. And in accordance to my mission as a rescue company, straight away got the route towards the tunnel. I didn't know it was my brother. And as I drew near with with all the soldiers to the spot, a sudden change of plans occurred, and I was ordered to go to the border in Gaza in order to bring a device that should help dealing with the tunnel. And as I went away from the zone, a hand rested on my shoulder, as they say. It was a senior officer who told me that the soldier is Hadar, actually Hadar. And a lot of soldiers have been endangering themselves on rescuing me outside. He gave me the phone. This is when I called my mother. This was when, at the time, Hadar was informed that he was still alive. And during the efforts, I went back home to my family. The house was packed with soldiers and people, like, I don't know if you've seen in the movies, but it was even more crazy than you see in the movies, especially in Israel, where this is, I think, one of the most high-profile things you can experience. And that was the point, I can say, friends, that I stopped my physical attempts to rescue my brother Hadar, and the new journey, the much more harder, long and tiring journey, a journey that we're dealing with for 4 years already, was about to begin. So now, I gave you a lot of examples. I think, and I give you one tool, only one strategic tool. There are more tools that are used by terrorists, but this is one that I think is very important and should be put in the awareness of most people, because this is where you can take part. It's a battle and a war that everybody can take part in, and I'll explain why am I saying this. Because when we entered the case of missing in action, we didn't realize that we were entering a bigger picture and a bigger conflict that is being made. And this is the way terrorists use the kidnapping and use their population, not in the battlefield, but outside in the international arena, in the diplomatic arena. And terrorist organizations have been using, as you know, the way of kidnapping in Israel, and set an equation where when they kidnap or abduct Israeli soldiers or civilians, it's an asset for them, and then they make Israel pay the price. They make Israel release thousands and thousands of terrorists in order to that come back to terrorist activity and come back to initiate more wars and more conflicts in Israel. And after 1 or 2 years, actually after we stepped into America for the first time, and specifically in New York, my parents, Leah and Simcha, Leah is here, my mother is here with me, started with absolutely no resources to advocate outside to describe the human rights case and humanitarian case of Hadar. And they started going and advocating from place to place, and afterwards it began. Today, now it's a foundation and an organization which is based on volunteers all around the world, with one claim, that a terrorist organization is not only shouldn't only ask for humanitarian advantages, but should also receive demands to make right all the wrong things they do. And so if I can sum up this conversation, then terrorism, after that I'll give you time to ask questions and Q&As, and I'll be happy to answer every question. But if I can summarize what I said, there's one strategy for in terrorism, and this is using our values against us. The second one, it's in all shapes and forms. It can be in battlefield, but it's also, the majority of it takes place outside in the international arena. And third, and which I say now, that there is a way to deal with it, and there's a way to change it. And the way it can be changed is through the international arena. It's through awareness and effect in every place and form that you can affect. So this is now the speaking part of me, and if you want any questions and any questions I can answer happily.
The question in summary form is, what does Tzur Goldin think about the effectiveness of a death penalty in Israel as a deterrent to terrorism?
I think we should have a very extensive conversation about how our values as a Jewish nation deal with this kind of penalty, but this is not for here. It's more about politics, and it's really more of a way for politicians to make promises or be more interesting. Thank you.
The question was, how can one morally fight back against terrorism, and how can one make the case to the media that the IDF is doing so?
Okay, so first and foremost, it's I think the right term is attitudes. It's changing the attitude. And I'm sure you're experiencing, I'll just concentrate with the example of Gaza, but we experience a lot of talks from various of different places. Iran, and a lot of other places, Lebanon, Syria, a lot of other places where terrorists deliberately use civilians and their humanitarian needs, their rightful humanitarian needs, and in exchange, and they take this hostage, and they actually take the European or American or Western diplomats and take them hostage, saying, you should comply to all our demands, you should feed us, feed the monster, you should give us all we need, because it's under the title of humanitarian aid, demand, and it's against your values. If your values are to take care of the needing societies, that's what you should do, right? So this is exactly what happens in Israel, exactly. And it happened, it occurred in the last 10 years concerning Gaza. We all know that Gaza is under a humanitarian crisis. Okay, there are nearly 2 million civilians that live in Gaza, and they're held hostage by 30,000 terrorists. That's it, not more than that, even less. So 30,000 dictators who hold these civilians as hostages. And what they do, they say, we can do all these terrible things to Israel. We can, and we talked about examples of moral conflicts. We can take children of our own, tell them to fly kites, which is a children's toy, put explosive in these kites, and then these explosives endanger civilian population in southern Israel, and burn crops. We can burn crops. We can burn, I don't know if it's 100,000 acres. I don't remember the numbers of crops. We demonstrate in front of Gaza for our cause with all those farmers who lost their crops. We can do a lot of things. We can initiate terror attacks. We can fire missiles. We can do everything. And why? Because we're under a humanitarian crisis. How do you draw the line from that point to the other? I don't know. But that's the way they hold the international community hostage towards their demands. And what they also say is that there's a humanitarian process, and we need to reach a permanent agreement for Gaza, and we rightfully do that. And so what the new approach of Israel, and what we also claim always, is that our humanitarian case also counts. Israel and the international society also has international demands. These international demands should be, and values should be complied, and they should be fulfilled before any progress should be made. And this is the approach towards Gaza, and we worked very hard to do that as a family, to I don't know if educate, but to change really the attitude, the paradigm, the way we think and see this kind of terrorism. And to really isolate. When we talk about the situation in Gaza, we don't talk about cutting the humanitarian aid or preventing medicine or food from these human beings. No. But a permanent agreement, the one which is the drafts that are being written presently about a permanent agreement for Gaza to rebuild airports and everything, all the siege on Gaza that everybody talks about. This should be met with demand for the unequivocal, unconditional release of our soldiers and of our civilians. And I think, and how can you affect? I think the first thing is to change the attitude and to understand that there's not only one way to deal with kidnapping or any other terrorism, because those who support terrorism are normally us, okay? Well, all of us, all the nations and all the great big funders. Actually, we here in context of the funding countries, we're in talks, progressive talks with funding countries that fund the humanitarian case of Gaza, trying to factor in the MIA, the soldiers who are being kidnapped, in the solution for Gaza. And to claim that pressure should be done and pressure should be made. And when this change in paradigm will occur, and I hope that we're seeing the fruits right now, change will come later. If I can only point out the latest example from the US administration, who signed the agreement with North Korea, then one of the conditions was releasing American soldiers. Fallen soldiers were held. So I think this approach is understood. Any businessman understands it, right? You have to be, if you want to prove to be credible of what you signed for, you have to show, if you're serious in, like Obama said here, in resolving the situation in Gaza, then you have to prove credible. You have to imply to our humanitarian values if you want to use them. Otherwise, you exploit them the same way you exploited the international ceasefire in Operation Protective Edge to abduct soldiers.
The gentleman has asked about the success or lack thereof of the efforts that Hadar and Dr. Goldin have had in their visits with foreign delegations of the UN over the past couple of weeks.
Right now we're in context of a specific meeting called the Donating Countries Gathering for a more permanent solution for Gaza. And there's also the Israeli mission involved in this kind of gathering. And our effort is to factor in our case as part of the bigger package, the bigger agreement, and actually put this as the first phase to reach the final resolution, which we are all interested in. And you will be surprised how much the Palestinian fractions are interested, very interested in this kind of deal and agreement, because they have their interest in proving that they are worthy leaders to their civilians. So you asked if we had much success, then I think time will tell, because we don't know how things will develop, and it's also a delicate region. A lot of threats from Gaza, a lot of threats from Israel towards Gaza, so we don't know what will the future hold. But what we do know is that all the representatives and ambassadors that we've met understand fully what I said here to you. They understand that this is not only about giving humanitarian aid, but the bigger picture and the main picture is how to combat impunity and how to combat terrorism. And they see this also as a very, very good opportunity to make a real statement that we are combating this. We can, if we are ones to fund, there's a saying in Hebrew, Baal HaMe'ah hu Baal HaDe'ah. Those who hold the funds hold the say, and give the say, and their say is what counts. And I think that with this attitude, a lot can be achieved. And if I may add, it's not just about the soldiers now. Unfortunately, my brother won't come to life again. This is about the future of the soldiers who go into battle and deserve to be brought back home to their families, and especially for their families. Because as I said, this kidnapping is about intimidating families who form society, and once this will be dealt with in a proper way, the bigger picture will be solved in the future, and those terrorists will think twice before they decide or even think about initiating kidnapping activities. So a gentleman in the crowd asked about the way that the American administration cuts funds from the Palestinian fractions. You're referring to UNRWA, UNRWA funds and various different funds that has been proven to sponsor terrorism, and the way that the European entities are replacing these funds. And actually, well, I think more of the same. You asked about my general view about this and how this can be related to our case. Am I right? Yeah. Okay. So my answer is that no matter what your political view about this is, whether we like it or not, we're entering a phase where all the major funds, or all, let's say, the major channels that fund the Palestinian fraction, also not only Palestinians, or not only in Israel, but also in other places in the world, are starting reforms. Okay, so we're in a period where the way the world deals with these entities, which play two roles, two hats. One, they are dictators towards their people and they're terrorists, and the second one is they're taking care of their humanitarian issues. So this is a very good opportunity for all the international community, and everyone deals it. We walk from place to place. Just before we were here, a few months ago, we were in Brussels in the EU institutes. Everyone are dealing with this. So no matter where you're in the picture, if you support cutting funds, or you don't support, or you're replacing the funds, I think our view is that while doing reforms, while reforming funds, there should have to be three main things. One is combating impunity. Two, making sure that all the people who receive funds are committed to the norms that the funders give. And the third is that reinforcing that all those places can be reinforced in an effective way. All those funds can and institutes that and entities that use those funds can be reinforced by outside entities. So that's my answer. Thank you. So the question is what are Hamas's demands for the prisoners, Israeli prisoners who are held in Gaza, and what is our approach really? How do we react to those demands?
What demands are they making?
What demands are they making?
Are they making of Israel or you or whatever
Okay.
to return your brother rightfully to your family?
Okay, so the demands, Hamas have their cynical demands. Okay, they haven't changed for a long time because this is what they do, right? This is part of their strategy. They claim that in order to release the prisoners, the only way is releasing convicted terrorists from Israeli jails. So that's what they request. That's what they demand. And they take a good example from the previous deal that has been made in 2009, releasing the soldier. Was the Prime Minister Netanyahu signed the deal where he released just over 1,000 of convicted murderers, terrorists, who came back to terrorist activity and took part in the war in Gaza, where I participated and my brother got kidnapped. And so this is their approach. They also have a very close demands, less but very close demands. But slowly and surely, they understand that they're in a very, very weak position. And actually, the latest updates, as the international community pushes both sides to reach a permanent agreement for Gaza, you see how slowly but surely their demands are getting lower and lower and lower. And most importantly, the criticism from within Gaza, from the civilians in Gaza, rises, like in other parts in the world where terrorist regimes, things are changing, are dynamic in that way. So mostly because of criticism from within population to solve the humanitarian crisis, we see how slowly but surely Hamas demands are getting lowered and lowered and lowered. And so our approach is that we should keep pushing as much as we can. We should make our messages, especially from the international community, from the U.S. administration, as clear as possible. And it will be resolved in a better way. We strongly believe it, and we have all the indications to believe so. Yes, please.
In reaction or response to what happened to your brother and other missing in action IDF soldiers, has the IDF changed in any way its protocols or its instructions to soldiers regarding the extreme care that you described that you must take to preserve civilian life both on both sides of the border?
Well, in a way, yes. Honestly, this is not something that is talked enough about. People, it's not the common conversation. But the Israeli IDF is always progressing its protocols. But rules have been always very, very strict, very, very clear. And I'm happy you asked this question because now I can tell you out of my experience. I went into a very long training in my unit, just over 1.5 years. And I went into training in, we've been together this week to West Point. I've been to the Ba'ad Echad, to to the IDF Officer Academy for a very long training, and I went to various trainings, and I can tell you that this is, if you'll visit any officer or commanding training in Israel, that's probably the first thing that you'll hear. How to give the tools for the soldiers to deal with civilian population. And it's not only how to deal, but also how to what are the gestures, how to show not only how to deal with the conflict, but also how to put civilians into refuge and how to take care of them. And well, in other places or forums that are biased to Israel, I need to explain it furthermore. You understand it better, but people think it's impossible to deal with it. I don't feel the same way. I don't feel that way because I was educated from the very first time I took my arms. We have a lot of various phrases like Tohar HaNeshek. I don't know what's the translation for that, but it's purity of arms. We have a document called Ruach Tzahal, the spirit of the IDF, which deals with all those conflicts. And actually in combat training, you also involve this. And this is the thing that is most prioritized. And I don't think anyone is planning to compromise on these rules. They do get sharpened as the threat arises, because now a soldier doesn't only need to deal with men and women who use firearms, but also women that appear to be pregnant or elderly people that appear to be not carrying any explosives on them. So I think it's the right place to learn. Every military academy or any place in the world come to Bahad Echad, to the Officer Academy, to learn how to not only deal with these situations, but also to learn the news, because unfortunately all the news in that certain topic are in Israel, because our enemies use whatever they can to use civilians as human shields. Okay, so the question is, I was talking about officers and elite units and people who go through very long training. A gentleman in the crowd asked, what is the ordinary soldier? So the simple soldier who has a very brief training, how does he get prepared? And my answer is the same way. Exactly the same way. Okay, I think he or she,
she's an IDF veteran.
There's an IDF veteran here she can give an example. I would love to elaborate about my experience how I delivered the message to my soldiers, but it's the very first steps, and I think people in the crowd have children and grandchildren in active service, and I think you should be proud. And there's so much to learn from all of them about what they learn, and you think it's only the lessons for life that they receive are only, I don't know, technical ones or maturity or whatever the good benefits are, but there's a lot that you can be surprised of and be proud of your families who get this kind of education. And you asked about ordinary soldiers. I'm telling you about ordinary soldiers who will never be involved in combat. Okay, I'm telling you about a girl or a boy who just recruited. They're 18 years old and they're going to intelligence, and they need to take care of certain inform. This also involves a lot of moral complications. Everyone from everywhere you go, even the guy who needs to sell the bufflot, you know what's bufflot? The chocolates in the shop, in the room. They have no military activity at all, never. That's what he will study. And and I welcome you all to enter a base whenever you're in Israel and to ask what's the first thing that they study about. So thank you. You were referring to another part of this case of MIA, of the missing in action, and all the civilians who were captive. Well, you all know that the question was about all the terrorist attacks that have occurred in the previous 4 years, ever since the war in Gaza, where terrorists use knives and rifles and whatever they have at hand to initiate attacks on civilians, and why after these attackers, terrorists, are being abducted, are being neutralized, why can't they be used as an exchange? Leverage. So this is also used by the Israeli government. I can tell you that only lately very detailed procedures have been made, but it took time. It took time because it took the government by surprise. I can tell you, after 40 years of dealing with terrorists who use this kidnapping, it's a real trauma. It's true reality. When you walk over Israel and you ask people in the street, they see this kidnapping as a trauma. It's like a person goes through any incident that causes them a trauma. They're intimidated by it. They feel that there's no other solution. Only terrorists can be, only murderers can be released in exchange for soldiers. And that's what we've done in extreme efforts for 4 years, also in Israel, mainly in Israel, to make a change in paradigm and to make it to a stage where people understand that the attitude can be changed and terrorists can receive a very solid message that will make them quit this kind of activity. So one of them, and this is one that is practiced by the Israeli government, is taking all those terrorists who are neutralized with the stabbing, whatever they have, and use them as leverage for this kind of exchange.
We all thank you for the service you've done for Israel and the Jewish people, and continue to do on the issue of bringing home IDF MIAs. Thank you very much.